back when you had a hold upon my heart. I'm not looking for a fantasy. One day, baby, you're gonna be mine. Why should the shadows come? I have never been. Will I still in a kiss just to let you know? So cold. Is it gonna be me with you? You're gonna be, I'll be there through the thick and thin, because I'm happy. What a difference a true love makes. Baby, I want you. Because I'm free, loving you gave me something new. I ain't never had regrets. Tonight all my plans are set.
Tanya Blunt wasn't some industry plant who got lucky, she earned her spot. Before Bad Boy, before the struggle, she was already making noise. She got her big break on Big Break, a talent show hosted by Natalie Cole. And it wasn't just a cute TV moment. That performance led to a major label deal with Polydor Records. Then came Sister Act 2. The movie that helped launch Lauryn Hill's career also introduced Tanya to the world. She held her own alongside vocal powerhouses, proving she had star potential. In 1994, she dropped her debut album, Natural Thing, and it actually charted. Her single, Through the Rain, made it onto the Billboard R&B charts, and she even snagged a Best New Artist nomination at the Soul Train Awards. On paper, Tanya's career was on the right track. She had the label, the co-signs, and a voice that could go toe-to-toe with the biggest R&B stars of the 90s. But behind the scenes, the business was shifting, and Tanya was the casualty. Polydor Records was going through internal changes, and before she could even find her footing, she got dropped. Just like that. It was a hard lesson. In this industry, talent means nothing if the business isn't working in your favor. Tanya was back to square one, trying to figure out her next move. And that's when Diddy came calling. Bad Boy was the label at the time. We're talking Biggie, Faith Evans, Total, and a young Mace. If you wanted to be a star in the 90s, Bad Boy was the golden ticket, or at least that's what Tanya thought. She didn't know that signing with Diddy was about to put her in a different kind of trap. And once she was in, there was no way out. Tanya Blunt should have been a household name. She had the talent, the voice, and even the Sister Act 2 co-sign. But instead of becoming an R&B superstar, she vanished. Not by accident, but by design. One minute, she was working with Whoopi Goldberg and Lauryn Hill. The next, she was homeless. And if you think this was just another case of music industry bad luck, think again. Tanya Blunt didn't just get overlooked. She got silenced. Because the industry doesn't just drop artists, it traps them, wastes their time, and makes sure they can't compete with the ones they actually want to push. So how did Tanya go from working with Diddy to fighting for her life? And why do we never talk about the way the industry sets up certain artists to fail? Let's get into it. Tanya Blunt wasn't some industry plant who got lucky. She earned her spot. Before Bad Boy, before the struggle, she was already making noise. She got her big break on Big Break, a talent show hosted by Natalie Cole. And it wasn't just a cute TV moment. That performance led to a major label deal with Polydor Records. Then came Sister Act 2. The movie that helped launch Lauryn Hill's career also introduced Tanya to the world. She held her own alongside vocal powerhouses, proving she had star potential. In 1994, she dropped her debut album Natural Thing, and it actually charted. Her single Through the Rain made it onto the Billboard R&B charts, and she even snagged a Best New Artist nomination at the Soul Train Awards. On paper, Tanya's career was on the right track. She had the label, the co-signs, and a voice that could go toe-to-toe with the biggest R&B stars of the 90s. But behind the scenes, the business was shifting and Tanya was the casualty. Polydor Records was going through internal changes, and before she could even find her footing, she got dropped. Just like that. It was a hard lesson. In this industry, talent means nothing if the business isn't working in your favor. Tanya was back to square one, trying to figure out her next move. And that's when Diddy came calling. Bad Boy was the label at the time. We're talking Biggie, Faith Evans, Total, and a young Mace. If you wanted to be a star in the 90s, Bad Boy was the golden ticket. Or at least, that's what Tanya thought. She didn't know that signing with Diddy was about to put her in a different kind of trap. And once she was in, there was no way out. Signing with Bad Boy Records in 1996 should have been Tanya's big break. This was when the label was at its peak. Biggie was ruling the rap game. Faith Evans was the first lady of Bad Boy. And Diddy was shaping himself into a music mogul. Tanya was about to be their next R&B star. And Diddy was personally involved in her project. He paired her with top-tier songwriters, the same people who wrote for Whitney Houston and Barbra Streisand, and put his signature touch on her music. But here's the thing about working with Diddy. You have to play by his rules. At first, everything seemed fine. Tanya was writing for herself and other Bad Boy artists, collaborating with some of the biggest names in the industry. She even recorded a gospel track with Maze called I Love Him for a Bad Boy gospel album. But when she started pushing for creative control, that's when things started to shift. Tanya didn't just want to be an R&B singer. She wanted to experiment, to blend genres, to create music that reflected all the sounds she grew up listening to. She went to Diddy with her vision, expecting him to support it. Instead, she got shut down. She later told the Washington City paper, "Here I was, this little black girl who wanted to do pop music and cross genres, and it wasn't possible." Diddy wasn't interested in making Tanya the artist she wanted to be. He had a formula, a brand, and if she didn't fit into it, he wasn't going to push her. Sound familiar? This same pattern has played out with countless artists under Bad Boy. Dawn Richard, Danity Kane, Day 26. Artists with major potential who were either controlled, shelved, or discarded. Tanya was no different. With no label, no album, and no career momentum, Tanya was back at square one. And without the music industry backing her, she had to figure out how to survive. That's when she started Kids on the Net, a non-profit dedicated to teaching low-income children about computers and the internet. She tried to move on, but she was still grappling with one thing: regret. Regret for leaving Bad Boy. Regret for not playing the game. Regret for not just going along with it so she could take care of her family. And when that regret became too much to bear, Tanya fell into the darkest moment of her life. And that's when things took a dangerous turn. Tanya Blunt's story isn't just a case of an artist falling through the cracks. This was a calculated industry move. Because here's what people don't realize. Labels don't just drop artists. They trap them. When a label signs you, it's not always because they want to make you a star. Sometimes, it's because they want to control the competition. It's an old industry tactic. Sign the artist, control their music, then do nothing with it. They'll hype you up, keep you under contract, and block you from signing elsewhere, all while making sure you never actually compete with the artists they're really investing in. And Bad Boy, they did this over and over again. Tanya wasn't an R&B singer in the way Diddy wanted. She wasn't a Faith Evans. She wasn't a Total. She didn't fit his formula. So instead of letting her go so she could thrive elsewhere, they kept her in limbo. It's the same thing that happened to Danity Kane, Day 26, and Dawn Richard, all talented artists who found themselves shelved, ignored, or discarded when Diddy lost interest. And once an artist is shelved, it's game over. By the time Tanya finally got out of her contract, 3 years had passed, and in the music industry, that's an eternity. By then, the industry had moved on. Her name wasn't buzzing anymore. She had no label, no team, and no opportunity to regain her momentum. And that's when everything came crashing down. Because when you dedicate your life to something and it's taken away from you before the world even gets to see your talent, that does something to your mind. And for Tanya, it led to something much darker. She wasn't just struggling professionally, she was struggling to stay alive. For Tanya, losing her career wasn't just a setback, it was an identity crisis. She had spent years believing she was destined for greatness, only to watch her dreams slip away with no explanation. And after years of being told she wasn't allowed to be the artist she wanted to be, she started questioning her own worth. At first, she tried to keep herself busy. She poured her energy into Kids on the Net, her nonprofit helping low-income children learn about technology. But no matter how much she distracted herself, the pain didn't go away. She had spent her whole life chasing a dream, and now that dream was dead. And then it hit her. If her career was over, what was the point of anything? She fell into a deep depression. Suicidal thoughts started creeping in. And one day, she made a decision. She was ready to leave this world. Tanya later admitted that she convinced herself that her son would be fine without her, that her family would move on. After her attempt, she woke up in a Dallas hospital under a 72-hour emergency psychiatric hold. When she was released, she was still completely lost. She drifted from place to place, eventually landing in Miami, completely alone. And that's when she had her breaking point. One night, she was parked in front of a beauty supply store, drowning in hopelessness. She prayed, "God, if you're real, show up." And then, something happened. A woman appeared out of nowhere. She walked up to Tanya's car and asked, "Are you new in town? What are you doing sitting here?" The woman, Dr. Brown, could tell something wasn't right. And instead of walking away, she did something that changed Tanya's life forever. She invited her over to a prayer meeting. Tanya later said that this small act of kindness, this one moment of love, pulled her back from the edge. For the first time in years, she felt hope. And from that moment on, she decided she was going to fight for herself again. But the road to rebuilding her life wouldn't be easy. She was still homeless, still struggling, still trying to figure out where she fit in the world. And then, she met someone who would change everything. A man who was just as lost as she was. And together, they would find a way back. Tanya had lost everything. Her career, her stability, even her sense of purpose. But life has a strange way of bringing the right people together at the right time. In 2010, she was booked to perform at Maryland's Love Fest, an event that, at the time, felt like just another gig. She had no idea that this one night would change her life forever. That's where she first saw Michael Trotter Jr., a struggling musician with a story just as heartbreaking as hers. Michael had been homeless for 2 years, a combat veteran who had returned from Iraq with nothing. He had 2 children to take care of, but no resources, no support, and no faith in himself. When Tanya heard him perform, she was blown away. His voice, his pain, his raw emotional delivery, it was unlike anything she had ever seen. The moment he got off stage, she ran up to him, bought 5 copies of his CDs, and exchanged numbers with him. But Michael, he didn't call her. At the time, he was in such a dark place, he couldn't even think about a relationship. "I had nothing," he later admitted. "I knew I wasn't marriage material or even boyfriend material." But Tanya didn't care. She kept reaching out to him, refusing to let him disappear like she had once disappeared. And eventually, they found each other. Their connection grew, and even though both of them had lost everything, they still had music. And so, they decided to make something new together. They formed the duo Trotter and Blunt, which later became the War and Treaty, a name that reflected their struggles, their battles, and their healing. And here's the irony. Tanya had once begged Diddy to let her experiment with different genres. And now, she was finally doing exactly that. They blended blues, folk, country, rock, gospel, all the things that the music industry once told her weren't possible. And this time, no one could stop her. But success didn't come overnight. They were still broke, still struggling, still trying to find their place. And to make things even harder, Michael was battling PTSD. And one day, Tanya saw that same darkness in his eyes that had once swallowed her whole. She knew he was ready to give up. And in that moment, she told him, "Michael, I know you have a plan to leave this world. But if you give me just 5 more minutes to love you, I promise I can make staying make sense." And that plea, it saved his life. It also became the chorus of one of their most powerful songs, 5 More Minutes. The industry had tried to break them both, but together, they were about to prove everyone wrong. Tanya Blunt and Michael Trotter Jr. weren't supposed to make it. They had been chewed up and spit out. By life, by the industry, by the very systems that were supposed to help them. But instead of letting the industry define them, they took control of their own story. As the War and Treaty, they didn't just make music, they made testimonies. Their songs weren't built for radio formulas or industry trends. They were raw, emotional, and unapologetically real. And people noticed. They started touring, gaining a cult following, and proving that there was a place for them in music after all. And then, in 2020, something happened that not even Tanya could have predicted. They were invited to perform at the Grammys, The same industry that once silenced Tanya was now watching her stand on one of the biggest stages in music. They also toured with Al Green, collaborated with major artists, and finally got the recognition they had been denied for so long. For Tanya, this wasn't just a comeback, it was a rebirth. The same woman who had been told she wasn't allowed to explore different genres was now making music on her own terms, blending soul, rock, blues, folk, and gospel without anyone telling her no. And just when things were finally coming together, life threw one last test. In 2020, at the start of the pandemic, Tanya contracted COVID-19. For 3 months, she was fighting to breathe, unable to perform, unsure if she'd even make it out alive. But just like every other challenge life had thrown at her, she survived. She and Michael picked up right where they left off, releasing their second studio album and continuing to tour the world. Because after everything she had been through, Tanya Blunt wasn't going anywhere. She had lost it all and rebuilt from nothing. She had been erased and came back stronger. The industry tried to bury her, but in the end, Tanya won. And the best part? She did it on her own terms. Tanya Blunt's story is proof that the music industry isn't just about talent. It's about control. It's about who they choose to push and who they choose to bury. But for every artist the industry shelves, there are others who refuse to stay silent. Tanya was supposed to be a forgotten name in 90s R&B history. Instead, she's still here, still making music, still proving them wrong. And for that, she deserves her flowers.